Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 99th episode of the Diverse Minds podcast. And I don't know about you, but often I find in life there are people who reach out to us in an unexpected way, who we've never heard of previously. They might be on the other side of the world. They've not been in our sphere of consciousness, but we build a true connection. And I think this has been more common and happening more often in a virtual world with social media to connect us. This is what happened when Deanna Singh, founder of Flying Elephant Enterprise, reached out to me and invited me to be a guest on her podcast. We spoke, and as they say, the rest was history. Today, as an appetizer to South Asian Heritage Month, I'm delighted to have Deanna as a guest on today's show. Deanna Singh is an accomplished author, educator, business leader, and champion for marginalized community. As the founder and chief change agent of Flying Elephant, Deanna consults with individuals and companies that are looking to make a positive difference in the world. She is known for giving clients the tools and courage to imagine, activate, and impact the world as agents of change. A social entrepreneur at her core, Deanna is always at the forefront of social change. She's established and operated multiple social innovations, including but not limited to the New York City office of LIFT, that's capital LIFT, which helps people find a way out of poverty for good, and Milwaukee's Street Law Program, an interactive legal program that has taught over 1,000 Milwaukee students basic legal knowledge. Deanna earned her Bachelor of Arts in Urban Studies from Fordham University, a Juris Doctorate from Georgetown University, and a Master's in Business Administration from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. She's also the author of 3 children's books, I Am a Boy of Color, I Am a Girl of Color, Cloth Crown, a forthcoming Girl's Guide with American Girl, and a business book, Purposeful Hustle. So needless to say, it's an absolute joy to have her on the show today. Deanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. So great to be here with you.
Oh, so I just read out your bio and the things that you have done and that you do. And I just wondered if you could tell our listeners a little bit more about what got you into social action, social activism, and having a social enterprise mindset around your business.
I think that really in many ways, this has been a part of the way that I was raised. I have always been taught that one of the things that you do when you think about how you measure your life and you measure your success is you really look at not just how you're doing, but you look at how those around you are doing. And so at a very young age, that ideology was a part of the way that I grew up, and it was a part of my strong core beliefs. And so really early on, I decided that my purpose in life was going to be to shift power to marginalized communities. And what I found kind of by chance and, trying and doing a lot of different things was that the space of social enterprise was the best fit for me, because it really was this idea of how do we take innovation and how do we take business principles and how do we take the law and all these other different things that I was really interested in, and how do we form them in a way that really shifts power to marginalized communities. And so that is what got me into the social enterprise space and why I think it's my home.
And so how did you end up, because you've had several businesses, Deanna, you've done several things. How did you end up creating and running Flying Elephant?
So Flying Elephant, in some way, fashion, or form, I've always had something that's been running right in the background, consulting or just something that was always running. People always joke with me. They're like, have you ever had a time in your career where you weren't working more than 2 or 3 jobs? And honestly, there was only 1 year of my career where that was the case, because I was contractually obligated to only have one position. And after a year, I renegotiated that because it was like not a good fit for me to be only, looking at one thing. And so Flying Elephant started though, because I was getting kind of frustrated by, quite honestly, the lack of diversity in the social enterprise space. So when you think about it as a formal, way to organize and a formal way to move forward, I just wasn't seeing a lot of people who look like me. And to be clear, there were a lot of people who are doing, and there are a lot of people of color, especially, who are doing social enterprise, but they're not necessarily calling it that. And so when I thought about where I could make an impact, and that this was the sector that made the most sense for me, and that there was all these other people that I thought, could benefit from being able to see what this platform looked like, and how to utilize it, I felt like it was really strong, a really strong opportunity to create Flying Elephant to model that. Right. So the real philosophy of Flying Elephant as a whole is to reimagine what social enterprise looks like. And all of our companies reflect that, and also reflect that purpose of shifting power to marginalized communities.
That's so fascinating. I can't believe you've only had 1 year where you just worked one job, and and you find that having lots of things on the go works for you.
It does. And I think that the reason for that is because even though on the surface they may seem like very different things, the reality is there's a thread that pulls through all of them. And that's that thread of the singular focus, shifting power to marginalized communities. But the other reason why I think it really works for me is because I think too often we put ourselves in these boxes, right? I do this, and this is all I do, and it's the only way that I can impact the world. But that's not true. I think that's false. I think that there's many different ways that we can impact the world, and there's many different things that are transferable. And so for me, being able to be in those different spaces and learn from different sectors and learn from different leaders and see how different, ways of like solving things, and bring those things back into other spaces and moving, across those bridges, for me, that is just really exhilarating. But I also think that it's really impactful.
Because so often we hear, I don't know about you, but you've got to niche down, you've got to be really clear, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And I think for many of us from global majority diaspora Black communities, that, like you said, that doesn't really fit, because we're used to doing lots of different things and having lots of different roles.
I saw that too. And I've seen that a lot, and I've actually gotten that kind of feedback in the past, and I appreciate it. Again, as we think about diversity, there are some people where that really works well for them. But like you said, it's just not the experience that I had. It's not how I grew up thinking about the world. It's not where I thrive. Right. And so even having that just understanding of the fact that from a cultural perspective, from a familial perspective, from a personality perspective, that feels stifling to me. And so it just doesn't really work.
And so the term, Flying Elephant, a lot around allyship, and you have this term uplifting impact. So I just wondered if you could tell us a bit more about how, what does this term uplifting impact mean to you, and how does it link to true allyship?
I mean, I'm going to take one quick step back. So Flying Elephant, people always ask, like, what does that mean? What is the concept behind the umbrella organization that is the holder of uplifting impact? And there's lots of context there. I mean, some of the backstory is that my husband, who we've been best friends since we were 10 years old, this year celebrating our 16th anniversary. So been together for a really long time. At 10 years, he walked me around our house, and he'd give me a gift, an anniversary gift. And it was a beautiful ornate elephant. I loved it. But I was like, is this a traditional gift? Like, why are you giving me this elephant statue? And he said, oh, it's to add to your collection. And I was like, what collection? And so he walked around our house, and he showed me that I had elephants in every room, right? That's what happens when you marry your best friend who knows you better than yourself. And I had been collecting them from all over the world. So there was this natural draw to the elephant. And there's many, many reasons for that without going into a ton of stories. But I think part of it is the fact that I come from this African-American, background and Asian Indian background, and just the elephant and what they mean in both of those cultures is really important, right? And what the elephant represents. So there's this idea of having the flying elephant. And the reason why I really was drawn to that, one is just because of, the elephant being this big, majestic, heavy, right? Beautiful thing, the way that many of our ideas are. And then the idea of flying elephant, like, how do we lift them off the ground? So that's the kind of the big, the big concept. And the reason why uplifting impact really worked as we were thinking about what we were going to name our diversity, equity, and inclusion work is because when I think about some of the big, heavy challenges, things that we in our world can do as we're trying to become better humans with each day, one of the things that we can do is we can figure out ways to one another, right? To understand one another, to communicate better with one another, to be more inclusive with one another. And so this idea of like, where can we have the most impact, right? And how do we actually lift that up? And who is having that impact? And how do we lift them up? And how do we take organizations that want to have that impact and lift them up? And how do we take the resources, right? So as I kept thinking, and the team kept thinking, like, what are all these things, right, that are in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space? What are we trying to do with them? And what we're trying to do, they exist, right? They're here. It's not like we're recreating them. They're here. Our diversity in the world exists. But how do we lift that up? How do we elevate it to a place where people understand the importance as leaders, and they also understand just how much it can do for us as a larger body?
Because there's a lot of lip service, isn't there? And there really is in the UK, Deanna. And there's a lot of, oh yeah, we need to be allies. Oh, 1 minute we're with women, 1 minute we're with people of color, 1 minute we're with LGBTQI plus community. And so, yeah, I think you're right. It's got to be this approach where we genuinely lift things up, lift ideas up, lift people up, and create a genuine space for equality.
Absolutely. And, the thing is that I think it's hard because I think that we don't have a lot of the tools to sustain. Right. Like, so I don't think that people are necessarily, sometimes it is disingenuous, right? Like, and it is lip service, but I think some of it is like the tooling up of people. But again, there comes that word up, right? Like, it's hard to talk about these things without thinking about, like, yeah, we have to tool up. We have to lift people up. We have to give people the ability to have that platform to be able to have these, these conversations. So that's where it comes from.
And you talked about being from Indian, South Asian background and an African-American dual heritage, from both backgrounds. How have both those cultures influenced your leadership style, do you think?
So I think in so many ways, I think probably every component of my leadership style has been influenced by both of my cultures, because I feel so incredibly blessed that I was able to watch people from both sides of my family watch their leadership and really emulate it. I often talk about my maternal grandmother. So we called her Big Mama, and, African-American woman, raised 9 children, always wanted to be a nurse, but because she was African-American, it was really hard to be able to get that status. And so she was a nurse's aide for her career, but did everything that a nurse, does. And just to watch her move through the world, I think one of the things that she taught me is that everybody's really important. And it's important as people that we take the time to make sure that we see other people. She had this thing where she would walk into a room and she'd put her 2 fingers out and she'd point at you with 2 fingers, not one, but with 2 fingers, she would say, "I see you." And sometimes she'd say it to strangers, and sometimes she'd say it to, I have this beautiful picture of her actually in my office, and she'd do this point, and she was right. She really did see people. And I saw my grandmother talk to, really big, important people, and people that maybe you wouldn't, for whatever reason, put into that category, and treat them all with the same level of respect. And to me, that is like the mark of a true leader. So there's many things I could say, but I think that that's one of the things I try really hard to emulate, is to make sure that people understand how much I value them.
Yeah. And some people will say, well, they're quite different cultures. Let's say some people might think, oh, they seem very, very distinct from one another. But for you, what have been the commonalities of growing up in this dual heritage household and the connections between both these cultures?
Well, I think one of the big things that I appreciate about both cultures is this sense of joy, right? That we're going to go at life with gusto, and we're going to find the joy, even in the midst sometimes of really intense challenges. I was just talking to my children last night, and they were imitating their grandfather, who they call Bob. So my father, who's Sikh American, and they were doing this cute, loving impression of my father. And what they did was they leaned in. They looked directly at me. So similar to what my grandmother did, right? Looked directly at me. And my son said, "You know what? God has never made a bad day. So of course I had a good day." Right. And that is something my father says all of the time. And it was so beautiful to hear my son say that. Right. So that mentality of like, Yeah, we've had to see some things. There have been some really devastating things that have happened in our immediate family, especially as it relates to like hate crimes and
Mm.
these things. But to know that not only does he say that to our children, say that to me, but like that's how he lives. His everyday life is powerful. And
Mm.
I see that not just in him, but I see that on my mother and my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, right? Like there's this
Mm.
resiliency and joy and desire really to bring people together.
That's such a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
Because I don't think all South Asian cultures are that. I have to say, I can't say that about my family at all. So that's interesting for me to hear. My family do not embrace joy at all. especially one side. It's like, let's make it, yeah, so it is interesting how different families interpret and do things in different ways, even though on paper they might look as if they're from the same cultural background.
Absolutely. And I think that's also really kind of neat too, because there are a lot of people who, in my like experience and like how I grew up, I was just saying to somebody the other day, it wasn't until I was like in my 20s or maybe late 20s even that I met anybody who was a Sikh American professional outside of probably 5 or 6 different professions, right? Like,
Okay.
and so for me, that was like and it was a jarring experience. Like, wait, you do what? I didn't know that there could be,
Yeah, I do know.
and
Yeah.
you don't realize that you haven't had that experience until you have the experience, right? And you're like, oh, now I understand why I kind of think this way, or I see things this way. It's because I've had a limited view of even my own culture and the roles and responsibilities that could be present in my own culture. So
yeah, completely. And so then thinking about workplaces, and you do a lot in this space, of course, what what do you advise? And it's a different cultural context in America, but what can workplaces do to have genuine spaces and places for allyship? What is your approach? How do you support organizations to do that?
So it is different, for every organization, because so much of it has to do with where the organization is in their development process. For some organizations, they've created a culture where people feel really comfortable having conversations and they have a pathway for it, and there's a strategy, and there's good direction on how to approach some of the issues that come up in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then, as there are some organizations where this is very new and things are very scary, and it seems like territory that they can't go into, or they're afraid to go into, or could cause a big catastrophe. So I think one thing before you kind of do anything is just to be honest about where you are, right? And where your organization really is, because I've seen organizations miscalculate that and try to engage in things that they were not ready for. And
Yeah.
so that would be my very first piece of advice, is figure out like, what is the temperament of your organization and what is it ready for? And then the second, that's tied very closely to, and where do you want to go? Because the other thing that I see happening quite a bit is trying to foster spaces but not really understanding how that connects back to the organization's bigger mission, bigger vision, right? And how you're going to be able to answer those kinds of questions that people will be thinking as you embrace some of these topics. So those are always kind of the first 2 steps, right? Like, let's make sure that we have a strong understanding of where we are right now and a vision for where we want to go.
And I think so. You're right. So many organizations, they do things reactively, and I understand why. And I think we've seen it many times, but you're right. It's a question of readiness. And when I had a conversation with another colleague, one of the episodes on workplace bullying, she said one of the issues is that it's still prevalent is this whole point around readiness.
Absolutely. And that's hard, right? And it's a very hard thing to do, because it's like, look at your own experience and tell me if you're ready, right? Like about something that maybe you don't have a lot of experience with or expertise with. And so that is where, right, like services like ours can be really helpful to organizations, because it can provide that lens to allow for them to see like, where are we really? So we're starting from the right place.
Brilliant. And Deanna, you're an incredibly busy person, and I always ask my guests this. So how do you look after your own mental health, and what are your top 3 tips?
So this is going to sound silly, but it really is one of the most important things that I do for my own mental health. And that is, I always schedule in really significant cuddling time. I'm a big Like I have two children who I love and adore, and I've already spoke of my husband, but we protect our family time aggressively, right?
Oh.
I know that that is where I have to go in order to be recharged up. I mean, the work charges me up and gets me excited and brings me a great deal of joy and energy. But I know that when I'm feeling most depleted, that when I'm with my family, that's where I can get charged back up. And so I'm really, really protective of that. The other thing that I'm protective of is just our calendar, and that those two things bleed together, right? So understanding, being able to manage the calendar, knowing I at the beginning of every quarter, I set a model calendar of this is what it needs to happen. Like I know what's coming down. At least I can forecast a little bit about what's coming. And here's the model calendar. I share it with my family. I share it with my team, and we try as much as we can. And I don't get it perfect every time, but we could try and get to about 80% like that of following what the model calendar actually says we're going to do. And then we make adjustments, right, as we need to go. But just having that model calendar also just helps my mental space, because I can say, you know what, I'm not getting enough thinking time. I'm not getting enough reading time. I'm not getting enough, right, of the other things that are workout time, of the other things that I know keep me sane.
So how does a model calendar work then? So you create something online or?
Yeah, so I actually use Google Calendar. It doesn't matter what your calendar system is, but because I normally have 4 or 5 calendars that are all working together. But one of my calendars, and it's in gray on my computer, is the model calendar. And in the model calendar, what I will do is I like to think about it sort of in buckets. And so at the big top of each day, as an entrepreneur running 4 companies, one of the things that I started instituting years and years and years ago is I put at the top, like, Monday is my strategy day. And it has been actually for probably 15 years now. On Friday is my financial day, Friday financial. And so it's not, and what that does, so that is at the top of the calendar, right? Like these are the kind of the focus areas for the day. Tuesdays are my staff day. So almost all my staff meetings happen on Tuesday. So I just kind of model it that way. But then within the calendar, there are big chunks, the same way that, some schools have block scheduling. So they have a couple of hours for this. And I just find that even though I like to be doing a lot of different things, if I can push, like, no, I'm going to do almost everything with marketing on this day, or I'm going to do all, whatever in this time spot, it helps everybody else understand where I'm going to be, and they can schedule accordingly. And then it also helps me to push things so that it just doesn't sit in my brain. I know that I can say, okay, well, I can't do this budget stuff right now, but on Friday I can make it my top priority when I look at the financial stuff.
Oh, I love it. I do love a color-coded calendar. So I have been doing something similar, but I don't think I'm as structured as you, Deanna.
And it's great, because I can go back and look at it, and like I can take the calendar on and off and see, like, hey, how much are we following what we said I was going to do, and how much is off, and what can we learn from that, and how am I feeling? And it's a really very simple, once you get it set up, it's a simple way to communicate with yourself, others, and to check in, like how are things actually going.
That is an excellent tip. I love the tips that all our guests give. They give such different things. I had someone said that with COVID and being in lockdown, that they will change, even if they're at home in particular clothes, they'll change for the evening, and that gives them mental separation.
Yes.
Some people talk about jigsaws. I just love it. I just love all the tips that the guests do.
That's awesome. I'm a big puzzler too. I love having a nice jigsaw puzzle to go and work on.
Oh, brilliant. And so, Deanna, thank you so much for your wisdom and for sharing your insights. And it's always great to have more of a global perspective. So from your own culture, but also from your, living in America, working in America. So if people want to know more about you and your work, how should they contact you, get in touch with you, follow you? And of course, I will include these in the show notes.
Absolutely. So the best way to sort of stay connected on social would be through LinkedIn. And I would say if you want to get, more information about the companies, you can always go to deannasingh.com. And there is a list of all the companies in the Flying Elephant umbrella, just if you want to kind of see all the amazing people and things that we get to work with through the company.
And I also meant to mention that you're an author, of course, of 3 children's books and your business book, Purposeful Hustle. So I didn't know if you wanted to mention that too.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for mentioning it. So there is a business book. It's a leadership book around how you find your purpose. So like I've shared it mine a couple of times, but I talk about how I got to that and then what you do, like how do you actually bring that to life and how do you use it to make a difference in the world? And then the children's books are through one of our companies, which is an imprint called Story to Tell Books. And what we do there is any books that we sell through storytotellbooks.com. My children who are 8 and 12 actually run that company, and they take profits from the book sales and actually redistribute them to other organizations supporting positive images of children of color. So it's a really nice way for us to try and change the narrative around, who gets represented in children's literature.
And it's so needed, isn't it? It's so needed from toys, books, everything, the imagery for children and whose faces are seen from that young age.
Right. Absolutely. So it's super fun work.
So I'll also include the links to that. So do check it out. And I'm just so grateful for your time and your wisdom, Deanna. And it's been wonderful to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all that you are doing.
Oh, no, it's lovely. And we've actually, again, someone else I've not met in real life, but hopefully we might be able to meet one day at some conference or event somewhere on the globe.
I am planning on it.
All right, Deanna, thank you so much and take care, listeners, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.